You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight is episode 96. We will be taking a look at the latest happenings in the Overwatch League. We'll take a look back at how 100% right we were at literally everything with our brackets when it comes to the Overwatch League playoffs. It was kind of a lot of stuff happening, guys. Some major things, you know. I mean, who would have predicted the upper finals of New York? Oh,
I mean, we got one of the teams right.
We did.
I mean, so that's something, right?
Yeah, that's got to count for something, guys. Yeah.
I mean, I feel somewhat better that the actual analysts and desk crew had no predictions in this fashion either. Mm-hmm. So it basically took everybody by left field. Like, this is, I mean, you know, credit to New York. We'll talk about them later, but they brought the pain, and it was cool to see. Like, at this point, I wouldn't be upset if New York won the finals, because I think they're a little overdue for it. But up to this point, they really haven't shown us anything that says that they should win it this year until the playoffs. And you know, it's very reminiscent of London last year. Like, London was decent all year and good, you know, here and there. They won stage one, and then they kind of fell off, and then they came back hard in the playoffs. And that's basically the story this year with New York. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But how was your week, Totem?
Well, it's been pretty good. Obviously, we've had a lot of stuff going on this past week. So busy playing Classic. Haven't done any placements yet, which I'll probably plan on doing tomorrow. But, you know, it's open a week of football, so that's been great. We got to see the Bears get destroyed and put up, like, no outer whatsoever, which is hilarious. So, you know, everyone in my area is gravely upset, and I'm just sitting here laughing, which is always fun for me. And then, you know, I'm beaten foul in fantasy football this week by a pretty wide margin, probably the largest margin for the week. But it's been good. Playoffs have been good. Also sad. So it's not New York who's, you know, going home kind of in tears. It's, you know, two Korean teams that aren't in New York. But yeah, well,
two of your favorite teams.
You know, it was really weird, because at first it's like, wait a minute. Basically, every team that's playing today, I own jerseys for. I don't even know who to root for in this situation, so it's just like, it was a gutting experience, but unfortunately, the Spitfire and the Dynasty are both out. The Dynasty exit probably a little bit more emotional, which of course we will get into. But how's this past week been treating you?
Oh, it's been a wild one, man. I mean, we're still recovering in my household, because my daughter was still pretty sick, so she's getting better. So pretty low key, hanging around the house, just decorating and doing stuff that wise. But in terms of like Overwatch, you know, played a little bit of role queue, and then, you know, dug into the playoffs, just because. I mean, it was every game, with the exception of the Shock London game, was fairly close. Like, they were all fairly you know, good games. I mean, some are a little more lopsided than others, but they were all fun to watch. You know, watching teams adapt around this meta and, you know, pull out Bastion here or there. You know, we got to see Atlanta pull out the Sim a little bit more. Seeing how different Doomfists play, like, it's actually very interesting to watch this meta unfold. And, you know, each week we get a little better look of, you know, who is the carry hero. Like, is it the Doomfist? Is it the Sigma? Is it the Orisa? It's not the Orisa. So you know, it's fun to watch that kind of stuff. And you know, if you have the all access pass, or if you go back through the replay viewer, you can watch individual like POVs, and you get to see how players are really like min-maxing it and stuff like that. So that's been a lot of fun. Like I went back and watched a few of the replays here and there, just to watch like specific POVs that I missed, or replay the egregious C9 like 4 times over and pause it and see where everybody was and see how it was going to play out and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really fun moments, but there's a lot of really like hard to stomach moments, especially if you're fans of those teams. Like, look, you lost Seoul in London this week. Welcome to being a Dallas Fuel fan in the playoffs, where you're basically just rooting for everybody. You're like, yay, I'm just happy to watch. So the only teams I really care about at this point, I guess you could say, would be the Spark in Vancouver. I'd like to see Atlanta win just for the storyline, but in terms of like teams I'm invested in, I'm just mostly excited to watch how the games play at this point. So it's been a lot of fun, but I'm ready to talk about in depth this past week, because I don't know about you, but I have a lot to say.
Well, that's always good. So, really quick, I do want to thank everyone who is joining us tonight on Twitch for our live show, and of course, thank all of our repeat listeners. So, everyone already knows who we are at this point. I mean, we're only, 96 episodes in at this point. I'm totally drunk, and that is Spider. So, let's go ahead and jump into this past week news, because there's been actually a little bit of movement in regards to coaching staffs. Promotions, people going to LFT, things like that. So first up, let's look at the LA Valiant, who have actually promoted Pac-10 to their head coach after he had served as the team's interim head coach for the majority of this current season. So looking back, a lot of this kind of happened after the Valiant's, rough start to the season when they went 0-7 in Stage 1. That is when they parted ways with Moon, and they basically bumped Pac-10 up from his assistant coaching spot. And of course, we also saw like a lot of other movement on the team where, they shied away from that mixed roster to focus more on the Western front. At that point, they picked up like Promise, they signed Fact Fiction, Shax, and the Valiants were an interesting story this year, because for one, they were like the first team to defeat the Vancouver Titans in the regular season. But again, they were that close to redeeming themselves after that 0-7 stage, coming 1 game shy of making the play-in tournament. But you know what? Just based on how the play-in went, the higher seeds would have advanced anyway, so they probably would have been down and out either way. But, I'm not too surprised to see them staying in-house. Pac-10 seemed like an obvious choice. I did like how they made the announcement over, like, social media, doing, short videos to talk about the promotion. But, like, if you're the Valiant, like, obviously we're in the off-season at this point for them. Like, what sort of moves do you think that this team is going to make? Or do you think they're going to keep things kind of like where they're at right now, knowing that they did a fairly decent job at turning that season around, even after such a disastrous start?
I think, well, first of all, I think keeping Pac-10 on is a great idea, because we saw what he was able to do, and I think he deserves at least a whole season to see what he can do with this team. Because you have to think that maybe if he was part of the team a little earlier, some of those close Stage 1 games where they went to 5 maps, because they went to like 5 maps in Stage 1 like at least 3 times, maybe even more. It could have been a win. Like 1 or 2 of those, if they would have been a win, you got to think they would have been in the playoffs at that point. What would have happened since then, who knows? But so I think he deserves the shot. In terms of like the Valiant as a whole, I think they just need to, round out their DPS a little bit more. That seems to be, a little bit hit or miss. It seems like they got the tank line that they want between Space and Fact Fiction. So, I think the support lineup's good. So I feel like there's not too many like moves or trades that they're going to make in the off season, other than just filling out the bench a little bit more. So you also have to think in terms of travel. So probably filling out See, this gets into a bigger discussion, which we don't have time for. But I think they just need to fill out the bench to 12 people so that they have enough players to practice with. Have a couple extras per role, and then they'll be good. Because honestly, at this point, that's what most teams are going to need. And I don't think like there's no like egregious like faults that I can find in the Valiant right now. Like they're little minute things like Kareev and support are a good support duo. Are they the best? I don't know. Maybe you could replace Kareev with somebody. You could pull Custa to a coaching role. There's little minute moves that they could do if they really wanted to, but there's not like a glaring weakness. Like they don't have a Janice on their team. Like they don't have like that level of discrepancy. So I feel like the Valiant are in a good place. I feel like Packing 10 getting the official call up is good for the morale going into the next season. So I think they'll do pretty well.
Absolutely. So this is not the only team out there to pick up a new head coach, as we also have to take a look at the Boston Uprising, who honestly have been without a head coach ever since Krusty departed back in May of 2018. Of course, we've seen what Krusty has done since moving on from, the Boston Uprising, because, Shaka been doing pretty good, a lot better than, how the Uprising were doing at the time. But since Krusty left the Boston Uprising, the Uprising have gone 12-26 in the regular season. And when you look at the coaching staff, they get Shake, Mini, Speckle, and they also have Goomba, who was with the Valiant prior, who I know had posted he was looking for a team, so it doesn't look like he'll be back with Uprising in 2020. And they've turned to a former Overwatch League coach from the Florida Mayhem, that being none other than Mineral. Now, Mineral had coached the Mayhem from August of 2017 all the way through April 2019. And that was when, very similar to the Valiant, you had the overhaul of the Florida Mayhem move into that Korean front. And with the Mayhem, Mineral led that team to an 8-39 record. Now, the Uprising have definitely been kind of riding the struggle bus, especially in the second half of this season. They finished the 2019 season only picking up 8 wins out of the 28 games, and in that second half of the season, they only took home 1 win in the last 14 games, and that included a winless Stage 4. So it's been a rough streak for Boston Uprising. This has always kind of been the team who, I don't want to say have tried to skate by with the bare minimum, but they have this reputation of selling off talent, buying low and trying to sell high. And I can't help but feel that this is another budget sign-in, just based off of Mineral's track record. But who knows? Maybe with the Mayhem, it was just not the best environment for Mineral. Obviously, going back to the inaugural season, the Mayhem didn't really have a lot of pieces when it comes to their coaching staff, so maybe Boston is going to end up being a better fit for Mineral moving forward into the 2020 season.
Yeah, I mean, Mineral is a smart guy. Like, if you've ever watched any of his content, if you've ever seen him, do any interviews or talk on stream, he knows Overwatch pretty well. So maybe just Florida wasn't a good pick for him, but I absolutely agree, and I hate to do this, but I feel like Ed and R said it best. Like, Boston Uprising is like the farm team. Like, they're the team that always, buys low and sells high. Like that's what they do. And we saw it with Striker, we saw it with multiple other, we saw it with Note, supposedly. So I feel like that this, I have to agree with you. Like, I feel like this is exactly what they're doing with Mineral. Like they needed a coach. They obviously saw that, hey, we can't go with a no head coach, because that obviously didn't work, and that goes counter to what they're trying to do, because you can't sell high if you don't win any games. And in terms of Goomba, like I don't expect him to stay with the team, just because he has voiced some displeasure in the past with some of the ways they do things. Nothing too overt, but you could tell like he just wasn't happy with the environment there. And he's the same way. Like, he's a super smart guy. Like, he knows the Overwatch very well. So I feel like some of these other teams that are struggling might pick him up. Like he might be a good fit for Toronto or stuff like that. So if you say he might be looking for a team, that doesn't shock me if that turns out to be true, just because of the fact that it seems like he wanted to move to a greener pasture. So this whole mineral pickup caught me by a little bit of surprise because I was kind of like, wait, why him? And then I was like, oh wait, it's Boston. That's why. So, you need a head coach. So at least Boston saw that they had somewhat of a hole that they needed to fill. So good for them, I guess.
I mean, they nearly went 2 years without a head coach, so
Yeah. I guess at this point I can really talk trash about Boston because there's no fear of like them coming back and like having a perfect stage like what happened to me last season. Like at this point it's basically like, well, they looked like crap in season 2, pretty much the same as Dallas Fuel. And both teams are going to have to make some very big changes. So go Boston, go Dallas.
So if Goonba is going towards greater pastures, do you think he's going to go to Houston?
He could go to Houston. I mean, as much of a joke as that is, with the greener pastures, but I did pick up on that. Thank you. But Houston wouldn't be a bad fit for them. Flame and Tyrong have not done amazingly in Houston, so I think he'd be a good fit there, unironically and ironically.
Yeah, like the Outlaws during the offseason are to be a very intriguing case just because obviously we know there was a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes and we don't know how much or to what extent that limited what they could do in regards to, making moves, anything like that. So I honestly have no idea what the future's gonna hold for the Outlaws, but it seems like they're sitting tight for it now with their new investors, so we'll see where they're going to go from here. But moving on, we also have something that's been happening for a while now in regards to the Hangzhou Spark, but is actually made official with the sign-in of U4 as an assistant coach for the Hangzhou Spark. And what's interesting about this is that U4's actually been helping this team dating all the way back to the end of Stage 2, where he would do a lot of work alongside the Spark head coach with tactics, gameplay training, also doing VOD reviews, things like that. And, if that name sounds familiar, it's because U4 was the first head coach for the Shanghai Dragons, and of course, we all know the memes from yesteryear, but U4 had to, he departed the team back in March of 2018 from the Dragons, and I know he's had other coaching since and primarily dealing with the Chinese Contenders team, so I know he was with Lingan Esports. He also coached Flag Gaming to a second place finish back in Season 3 of 2018. And, I always find it interesting. I don't know if this means, U4 was working, off-site with the team and working that way. Because, not everyone actually coaches on-site with people. We've heard of people, remote coaching from elsewhere in the world and then finally moving over at different points in time. So I'm assuming that's the case here if he was, competing, or not competing, but actually coaching in China.
Yeah, it sounds like he is probably remote coaching and, was a contracted, help. He was just there to help with, the minute things, like you said, like VOD reviews and maybe some individual player coaching and just helping the coach sort things like an assistant to the assistant coach.
Maybe they were trying to see if Crystal was back in China.
Oh, undercover agent.
Mm-hmm.
That could possibly not be it at all. But since he's been part of the team since Stage 2, I don't have any amazing insight to this. Obviously, he's been doing well with the team. The team has gotten better since Stage 2, so good for him to be officially signed now and actually part of the organization. So, this is going to be if the Spark continue to do well in the playoffs, this would be a good turnaround story for him from going from the Dragons to this now. Even if he went from head coach to assistant coach, still a good good story, and ups his stock a little bit. So maybe next year, if a team's looking for a head coach, he might get a chance to try again. Who knows?
And at least in this case, he's on a China team that actually made the playoffs and could actually win games too. So
Win games in the playoffs.
And a combination of both, exactly. Whether or not, the Spark continues to run remains to be seen, but we'll have more on that later in our post-game discussion. So that's all the coaching changes that we saw over the past week. Obviously, we still are in the middle of award season for the Overwatch League, and this past week they gave out both the Rookie of the Year as well as the 2019 MVP award. So looking at the Rookie of the Year, it has gone to none other than Vancouver Titans DPS Haxel, who, like many DPS, Stage 1 through 3 was stuck in Brigida jail. Now, I would say stuck in Haxel's case, but really, this was someone that was leading the league in regards to, like final blows with Genji whenever we got to see him go back to Projectile, who was playing a pretty mid-May at the time. But when he was playing Brigida, he was really at the forefront of Brig. I know he was top in hero damage. He also had the highest heal-in per team fight in the league as well. And it's so interesting, because, this is someone that has a very storied past when it comes to esports. So, I always find it weird whenever, you're talking about Haxel being a rookie. Even though, he's 18, but he's been around the scene for quite some time at this point. But it was just based on first year in the Overwatch League. And really, after the first half of the season, it was pretty obvious to me Haxel will definitely be in the front run-in for this award in particular. You could definitely make a case for a couple of other players out there as well, whether they were on one of the new expansion teams or just a new face of the league in general. But when you look at his stats, and obviously these are a little skewed because he didn't always get to play damage, but he still finished in 7th place overall when it comes to eliminations per 10 minutes at 19.34. But, his damage and healing kind of average out because of the 3 stages of Brig, so unfortunately he didn't, place top 20 or anything crazy in regards to that. But when you think about his performances, and I know, in the clips, they had, a lot of Genji stuff, and yes, he had, the whole, Blade against Florida Mayhem when he completely diced through the team multiple times. But it was kind of weird that they didn't show any of his Brig play, even though that was really what dominated for the majority of the season.
Like the rest of us, Overwatch League has put 3-3 as a distant memory, and they never want to remember it ever again. But I'm with you, because there were multiple times when he was on Brig, like you said, he thrived in Brig jail. It was weird. It was almost like he enjoyed it, because he was there. Sombra, when Sombra came into it, he was there stunning Sombras out of EMPs, and this was before the nerf, where it was became easier to do that. He was right at the forefront, countering multi DPS comps. When he was on Brig, he was playing her like a DPS hero. We saw a lot of other Brigs play very tentatively, play behind their Reinhardt. Haxel wasn't that. He was either covering his supports or he was in the front, swinging that flail. So it was weird that they left Brig out. But when you're giving Rookie of the Year to a damage dealer, you have to focus on them actually dealing damage, and a majority of that would be his Genji play. He looks good on any hero that they put him on. We've seen him on the Pharah recently. He was always up for debate for MVP. That's how strong of a candidate he was. He should have been in the MVP discussion. But I feel and this is deep state, tinfoil hat, but I feel like Overwatch League knew that they were going to push him for Rookie of the Year, so maybe they opted out of the MVP voting from behind the scenes, because you got to remember, a lot of the MVP voting to the point where we got to vote was already done at that point. Player, the coaches and stuff had already been voted. So I wonder if there's more to this story than we know, but I don't want to take away from him because I do think he is the most deserving of the, quote unquote rookies. Like it's still weird to say that he is a rookie, and like you said, he is only 18, so he is really young, and it would technically have been his first year anyway. But we've been watching this guy for years, like honestly since Apex. Back in the day, like we've been watching him, it would be like giving like rookie of the year to Tom Brady if he switched football leagues, if there was a competing football league. But it's that kind of thing. So I do think Hacksaw deserved it. He's a phenomenal player, and as the playoffs go on, it seems like he just makes more and more of a case for that, and that goes for the person we're going to talk about next too.
Yeah, and I will say, like, anytime we see Hoxel on screen, he just seems so calm and collected. Because, that team, even dating back to Runaway, were always in the moment, and, like, they don't really seem phased by that much. Because they've seen a lot, and they've been through a lot together as a squad. But moving into the MVP, it was Sinatra. No surprise there. Sinatra really, even dating back to, like, when we would cast our votes. He was winning by a landslide with the MVP vote in, and even if Hoxel was in the run-in, I don't think that would have changed anything. Obviously, Zaryas were a huge deal. They were like the main damage dealers when it comes to the whole 3-3 meta, and Sinatra was definitely at the forefront in that regard. So, looking back, here you have this kid who was signed to the Shock when he was 17. You still had a couple more months before he was eligible to play in the Overwatch League. And, people always kind of beamed about, like, the whole, $150,000 contract, one of the few known contracts at the time, anyway. And you look at where the Shock are now, where this year they were the only team to make it to every stage final. And, he won over a fellow Shock player in Super. Janu, Twilight, and Gushui were the other nominees in this case. But you look at Sinatra's stats this year, and he is in the top 10 in some pretty key categories. So he's second overall when it comes to eliminations at 20.91 per 10 minutes. I was in top 10 for, the least amount of deaths per 10 minutes. And then he topped out damage per 10 minutes at 11,949. So, I know with this one, a lot of people were kind of jarred a bit when it comes to, well, like, we didn't really get to see Sinatra a whole lot in Stage 4, but you can't deny the overall impact that Sinatra has had. And, when you look at the Zarya play that really dominated the league back to, when they first started doing the MVP, when it was still kind of going on, really it was Sinatra and Soa Minsu who were, like, at the top of the top when it comes to the Zarya play. So I'm not too surprised that Sinatra kind of just ran with it, but he's also matured a lot, and it really showed in his interview that he did when he was awarded the MVP this year.
No, like I always made the case for Twilight, but I can't make a case against Sinatra. Like he basically defined how Zarya should be played for 3/4 of the year. We didn't, like you said, we didn't see him a whole lot in Stage 4, but when we did, he looked great. Like it wasn't like he would come out and just like stink up the map. Like he still looked really good on Tracer. And then, going into the playoffs, and I know the playoffs don't really have anything to do with the MVP, but watching him on Doomfist, he's easily one of the best Doomfists we've seen throughout the playoffs. So you can't make a case against him. Like you had mentioned his stats. He also led the league in ults per 10 minutes. Like he basically made Zarya DPS a thing. Like that was excuse me, that was thanks to him. And he played her very differently than a lot of the other Zaryas. Like the other Zaryas were real tentative. Like we always saw him take really aggressive like flank angles or high ground or stuff like that. And sure, that costs them some matches and some maps definitely, but he was very aggressive. So I I think he's a great pick. Like I honestly think out of all of the candidates, I think he was the most consistent out of all of them. Even though we didn't see a whole lot of him stage 4, I still think even when we did, he was still consistently like top tier. So I think he was a great pick. The only thing I wonder now is what kind of Zarya skin we're gonna get. Like, do you think we'll get a Zarya skin, or do you think we'll get a Tracer skin? Because he was initially known as a Tracer player, so maybe he'll push for a Tracer skin. But I feel like it has to be Zarya, right? Because that's basically what he won MVP for.
Well, like, I know Shaka tweeted, like, hey, we wanna work with Gucci and try to get, like, a Gucci-themed Tracer skin. I'm like, Tracer already has so many skins in the game. I would imagine it would be Zarya, but at the end of the day, everyone knows him as a Tracer player, so I would assume that would be the case. But I'm conflicted. I think Zarya does need more skins. So if I had to personally vote, I would stick with Zarya in this case. But it's going to be a while before we even see what it's going to be.
Maybe after the playoffs, maybe it'll be a Doomfist skin, just because he's been a pretty well-known Doomfist for a while too. Other than the short stint in Overwatch World Cup last season where he played Doomfist briefly till they were knocked out.
We don't like to talk about last year's Overwatch World Cup.
I know we don't, but he did play Doomfist there, so maybe it'll be like a Gucci themed Doomfist skin, which I think would work really well. Like, just seeing a big blinged out like fist, like that would be awesome.
I mean, he already wears really nice, tuxedos, so it wouldn't be too far of a stretch.
There you go.
But everything is kind of turning up for Talon, especially in this meta. They're everywhere.
Except Widowmaker.
Except
they were like, "Hey, Widow, go home." But what?
Go back to your husband. Oh wait. Feels bad, man. But anyways, let's go ahead. Let's talk playoffs. So, obviously, we posted our brackets in the Discord. I did not tally up how many points we didn't get, primarily because it's not good for anyone. Primarily more worse for me, I would say, just because I kind of flipped the script since our last show on one of the matches, and then Gladiators ended up winning their first playoff game, much to my chagrin. But anyways, we have 2 teams eliminated from the playoffs already, and it is both teams that made it through the play-in tournaments. That would be none other than the Seoul Dynasty, and who were the defending champions at the time, the London Spitfire. So we're guaranteed new Overwatch League champs this year. And, for the Dynasty, yes, they won in a play-in, but then they had a date with the Vancouver Titans, the top seed in the Overwatch League playoffs, and they lost to Vancouver with a scoreline of 4-2. Then they would go on to face a Hancho Spark in the lower brackets, and they only picked up one map in that one, losing 4-1. So that's unfortunate. For London, a lot of people are pegging them as favorites to beat the New York Excelsior. And obviously, everyone knows the narrative. I'm not gonna deep dive into that, but New York's kind of looking pretty damn good. Like, we'll be real. Like, it was not to the I expected them to be better. They have not been running the lineup that I would have guessed based on our predictions, which is nice. And honestly, with how everything is kind of played out, really the best way to kind of put these playoffs is it's nothing is really as it seems to be. Our predictions have been kind of all over the place. We've been good in some spots and way off in others. But you know what? That seems to be pretty common around all of the creators, which is so crazy. No one has been spot on in a majority of situations, which is so entertaining when it comes to being right in certain things, but then seeing those things happen in a different spot. I know I don't know if it was on OWL by the Numbers or Heroes of Die when I was talking about the whole redemption arc for New York against Atlanta. But I did favor New York in that situation over Atlanta, and sure enough, they did get that win. But London, they lost 4-1 to New York, even though like they had a pretty good track record against that squad. And then they face a really angry San Francisco Shock team who were dropped to the lower bracket in pretty devastating fashion. And the Shock just full rode them. Like, that was probably the most one-sided series that we have seen throughout the playoffs so far. And, with the Dynasty, I know there's been a lot of talk about, the post-game interviews with, the people that have been losing and going out of the playoffs. A lot of criticism being thrown around, especially towards, Ryu Jae-han. A lot of people saying, like, he's the biggest bust in, the Overwatch League. And then
one person is saying that.
One person, and it's blown out of proportion. But, like, you go online on, the social media or over on Reddit, and it's everywhere. But I feel like there's been more discussion in regards to the whole interview process. I would say has definitely been called into question more times than not. But it's been interesting on both of these teams. So obviously, there were a lot of expectations with London just due to how they were looking in stage 4, and there was a lot of question marks kind of coming out of the gate because they did not play Bird Rain at all in the playoffs. So we saw Guard coming back in to play DPS. And, we've seen the Dynasty continuing to stick to, like, their normal 6. So there's been a lot of pressure put on, like, Fitz and Flooded to perform on the DPS roles, who at different times looked really great, and at other times couldn't quite measure up to the opposition. And I know when it comes to the Dynasty, especially in that Spark game, they just did not have an answer for Bozzy's Doomfist at all in that series. He was getting clean engages time and time again, and that really was one of the most defining things about that loss in particular. But man, Jaehan was really beating himself up. Obviously he got very emotional in that post-game interview. I know he had a drunk stream, as much as he would deny him being drunk time and time again on stream. And there was a whole like translation thing with that, and I know there were some funny things that kind of came out of that. But it's so weird, kind of like reflecting, like, man, like, we really thought London was going to come in and perform at a higher level, and Dynasty have always been pretty consistent, and then after such high highs, and they go 0-2 and they kind of putter out. It's a shame.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot to unpack there that you gave me. So I'll focus on the Dynasty first. Like, the Dynasty came into the playoffs hot off of the play-ins, and they looked really good. Unfortunately, the Dynasty's problems are still there, and their problems are their DPS. Like, as much as Jae-hong wants to beat himself up or like shake his fist at Toby in a mocking fashion, the Dynasty's problems is their DPS, and that's a weird thing to say because Fleta is the meta and Fitz looks great on Doomfist. The problem is it is so feast or famine with them. So they need more consistent, like a higher caliber DPS. Beyond that, like I don't think they have any glaring weaknesses. Like I think they have a solid lineup with Ryu Jae-hong, Toby, Marvel, and Michelle. Like I think they have a very good team. I think they just this is kind of where their season came back to bite them, where they just didn't have a season of team synergy behind them where they could compete. Whereas the Spark, even though they've shifted members in and out, it hasn't quite been to the level of the Dynasty where they were fielding 2 teams at one point. So I feel like the Dynasty just need to get a little more teamwork under their belt. I feel like they need to, get some DPS, and I'm sure the weight of expectation on them is huge, being the Korea team, and they failed to perform the first season, and they did much better the second season. So I feel like that's kind of what they have to take away from this, is they're making positive strides. So as long as they keep it up, they could be a serious contender in season 3, and they're gonna have the the fans behind them in season 3. So I think that will help. They did play the Titans very close. Like the 4-2 tagline doesn't really do that one justice, because that one could have easily been 4-3, or even gone 4-3 a different direction in terms of Soul's favor, because they did play them very close. Now the Spitfire, on the other hand, they look bad. Like I can't defend their play the way I do Soul's play. Like even though Soul kind of got dunked on by the Spark, they traditionally get dunked on by the Spark. And the Spark, which we will talk about shortly, I have a lot to say on them. But the Spitfire just, I don't know, like they forgot to cash in their scrim bucks. Like they looked okay during the play-ins. Like you got to remember that they went through that epic showdown with the Dragons, and we thought that was like a great match, which it was. Like it's an entertaining match, but as we see this meta develop more and more, like you start to see that technically it wasn't a great match. Like it was basically just those two slamming into each other and seeing who could win. Like there like in terms of like mechanical skill and stuff like that, there wasn't a whole lot of it during that London Dragons game, compared to what we're seeing out of like say New York or Vancouver, where there's like very tight timings and combos and stuff like that. So Spitfire, we thought were going to be good, but after that first game, like I didn't have any hope for them. And then when I saw that they were going up against the Shock, like Shock narrowly lost to Atlanta, which we're going to talk about in a second. So I knew the Shock would beat London at that point. Like I had no faith in London, and the Shock, like you said during that game, just looked angry. Like London, to their credit, made it close at times, but at the end of the day, it wasn't close enough, because they didn't take a map. Like they took one map in their whole playoff run. So that's going to tell you how it goes. It is weird that both of the play-in teams were knocked out first. Like that's very by the books, and very they actually put out an article today. Like if you just look at the seeding numbers, everything's going to plan. Like that is it is strange, but when you put the names in, that's where things get a little wonky. So I was, like everybody, I was heartbroken to watch Ryu Jae-hong and Toby, get super emotional up there, because you could tell like they're really invested. And then London and Bird Ring, I feel like we're going to hear a lot about that in the coming weeks. Like I feel like that is this season's Fisher drama, because it seems like Bird Ring is off the grid at this point. Like he deleted his Twitter, he made like a post on Instagram like I'm just not motivated and stuff like that. So we're gonna hear about that for a little bit. But yeah, that no Philly story this year going into Philly, because Philly made that run last year being the bottom seed. So that's not going to happen this year. But yeah, I was sad to see Seoul go. I wasn't sad to see London go, because I wanted a new champion. Like I was secretly like I was disappointed in the way they went out, but I'm not sad. So it's definitely that I'm not sad. I'm just disappointed parent moment.
So we also saw a pretty good quarterfinal match between the LA Gladiators and the Hangzhou Spark, which went 7 maps, and it was the Gladiators who took that win 4-3. So for one, that was a huge win for LA, primarily just due to the fact that, for one, the Gladiators actually won in the postseason, which was good, even though the Spark had done pretty good against the Gladiators in the past. So the win basically set up a match with the Gladiators and the Titans in the upper bracket, which at that point would have been the semifinals, sending the Spark down to the lower bracket. But we already kind of like talked about how the Spark did against the Dynasty, and the Spark's next match is going to be against the Atlanta Reign, who definitely had their interesting things happening to them. Like, for instance, Gator started as their off take, which no one saw. We didn't see FRD, we didn't see Daco. It's been Gator, who, now that he's played a couple of games, is not going to be eligible to compete in the gauntlet. And I know there's been a little bit of, the discussion about, like, is it really worth it in that case? And if you're Atlanta Reign, no better opportunity for a player, regardless of if they're two-way or not, than in the Overwatch League playoffs. They'd much rather have, the bigger piece out of that pie as opposed to contenders' money at the end of the day. And, we can't deny Gator's presence that he has had on the Sigma throughout these playoffs. So, the Gladiators, when you look at this team, it's been their aggression that has been the focal point for them so far. We've seen a lot of rotating being done in regards to hydration, so not only has he been playing DPS, we've also seen him at times moving over to tank to play Sigma for the team, and he's looked pretty good in both regards. So I know kind of going in, there was always a discussion, well, like, is he going to be their Sigma player? Is he going to be on Projectile? And if he is on Projectile, is he going to be on Doomfist? Is he going to be on Pharah? Because we've seen all of those things in the playoffs. But it's been a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. And I have to say, too, I always giggle every time we see the Gladiator promo on TV, whenever the Gladiators are playing on stage. That's been happening a lot throughout the playoffs, which is always on point. And I know someone posted something in Discord about that, which I'm sure was a meme, but I haven't watched that yet, so I'll have to go back and check that out. But, just to see the Gladiators come in, get their first win in the playoffs, that was an absolutely monumental deal. Hold on, I'm reading Twitch chat. But anyways, the Gladiators across the board, they've been looking like a pretty good team across the board, and it's really been the engages with the Doofus that have really been setting up the plays. I know a lot of people have been hyping up a lot of the Halt Rocket Punch combos, which we have been seeing time and time again. But when we look at hydration, where do you feel like he's had the biggest impact? Is it with the versatility, or do you feel like one of his roles in particular has been really outshining the other at this point?
I mean, his versatility can't be understated, but clearly they value the DPS roles more because he, as we saw in the second game against the Titans, they did not switch him over to a tank role. So I have to feel like they value the Doomfist more, and I don't know if I agree with that. Like, maybe there's something behind the scenes that we don't see, because when they put him in on the Sigma, he looked a better Sigma than Void, and Decay still looked like a good Doomfist. Like, I don't think he was quite to the level of hydration, but he did look like a competent, well-functioning Doomfist, which is hard to do if you're not a Doomfist player. Because Doomfist, I think, is probably one of the most mechanically demanding heroes in that type. Like, he's like Genji. You have to be a specialist to do well as him. So I feel like they just value him in the DPS role, and maybe he just plays really well with Surefour, because Surefour has been like the low-key carry of this team in the playoffs. Memes aside, Surefour, whenever he gets on Reaper, is insane. Like, they posted, various stats about him, how he's first in various fields in Reaper and all kinds of stuff. And while Surefour, obviously floats around between heroes just like the rest of the Gladiators, because they're all very versatile, when he does get a chance to play that Reaper, it turns maps for them. Like, it turns points for them. So clearly, the Gladiators have the pieces they need in the DPS spot. It's funny because it's almost like that meme is true. Like, if they had 5 hydrations and 1 Surefour, they might do better. But coming out and winning their first match was huge. They played the Titans close again. Like, the Titans won 2, I don't want to say super close games, but they were closer than the 4-2. Like, there were multiple points there that the Gladiators could have turned. So, a little bit stronger play from hydration, a little bit better play from Roar. Oddly, Big Goose was caught out a few times. That was kind of strange because that's uncharacteristic of him. So I do feel like the Gladiators, when they play the Shock, have the tools that they need to compete. I we'll talk about it more, but I don't think they're gonna win. In terms of the Spark, now that is the juicy team, because this is the team that we had no expectations for going into the playoffs. Like, they came out and surprised pretty much everybody. So, that first game against the Gladiators, they played very close. And honestly, the only difference maker in that game was, I'd honestly say Surefour, because he single handedly turned some points around for them. But Bozzy, holy cow! Like Bozzy, last week, if you go back and listen to our show, like we were like, what is their DPS going to do? That's because nobody had any intel on Bozzy, playing the Doomfist, and Godsby was still consistent. So those two together were phenomenal. Like like I said, they pushed the Gladiators, and then they go in and then they play Soul, and they make Soul look bad. Like Soul hasn't looked bad this whole time, but they make Soul, like they basically show Soul's DPS hole at that point. Like they show the difference in the caliber of DPS. So and the thing about the Spark is, and I'm going to repeat this later, so listen now. The Spark only get better the more they play in a meta. So the more chances they have to play, the more dangerous they get. So if they can win the next match, they have a good chance to make a playoff run, like, because they're just going to keep getting better and better. It's honestly crazy. And I do want to go back to Godsby, just because all the focus is on Bozzy and his Doomfist and stuff like that. Is yes, Soul have a DPS hole that needs to be filled. That's the second time I've said that tonight. So, but Godsby, in terms of DPS, he's first in damage per 10 and third for limbs per 10 in the postseason. So, Bozzy is an amazing Doomfist, and he's doing what Doomfists need to do, getting in the back line, disrupting, getting a pick here and there, stuff like that. But Godsby has consistently been just dealing the damage that they need to secure these kills. So Spark are dangerous, and I am excited to see if the Spark, because the Spark play
Atlanta.
the Rain. So yeah, that's gonna be a good game.
Yeah, so when we're looking at the brackets, both the Spark and the Gladiators are fighting for survival at this point, since both are in the losers bracket. So this week when we're previewing the games, we do have Atlanta versus Hanjo, and then the LA Gladiators face the San Francisco Shock, which should be an interesting game. We'll see how pissed off the Shock still are, and it's for good reason. So the Atlanta Reign, they come in and they upset who many have as the favorites to win it all in the San Francisco Shock. And this one was a grueling series. This went 7 maps. It ended on Rialto. And it's worth noting the ending of this particular series, pretty devastating. Like, let's be real. It was probably, like, I can't think of a more devastating moment with this high of stakes in regards to, when something like this happens. A lot of people are calling it, like, the worst C9 that we have seen. I don't know if I would say that.
No.
But it definitely gave me flashbacks to the Stage 1 finals, where they also lost in a map 7, also on Rialto. Except in that case, it was against Vancouver Titans. But honestly, the thing that made that particular moment so devastating is when you look at how everyone was on the field. The Shock were in a pretty good position. They had control of the fight. Violet was, 4 or 5% away from earning his Coalescence. They'd already had 2 picks on Airster and Mazah. They had 3 of the remaining Rain players below half health at this time. One of them was actually like 1 bar away from dying, so they were in complete control. And then Gator just comes in accretion, knocks people back. It's just like, man, we saw like the reaction shot, and Moth had the expression that all of us would have had in that moment, but it was gut wrenching. But man, like, to think that Atlanta just came in and then they just pulled one over the Shock in that sort of fashion really shattered a lot of brackets that we saw. And it's moments like that, when you lose in that sort of fashion, that is a moment that can make or break your team. It's how you answer back from that. And we saw what the Shock did to London after. I wouldn't say they were as cutthroat as I would have expected, knowing how they lost to Atlanta in that situation. But man, like, I don't want to take anything away from the Shock. Atlanta's definitely played up. They've really embraced like that dark horse mantra, and they're still in it. They've looked good. They've actually had great success with the Symmetra, which we're not used to seeing because that didn't really work out in the lanes at all. But then again, like, the play-in meta hasn't directly translated to the playoffs. Like, we're not seeing Pharah and Doomfist partnered in every game like we were in the play-ins, which is kind of interesting. And then, of course, we've seen, like, a little bit of Hanzo here and there. We've seen a pretty surprising amount of Bastion throughout all of this. But, you look back at moments like that, and it's just like, to think that the Titans might only have to face the Shock once to walk away with the title, or anyone in that matter, is such a huge benefit to those other teams. It's just a matter of how much can the Shock run this one back. And, when you're looking at how well they've done over the season, they have been you can definitely make a coin toss on who you think's been the strongest team throughout the season, whether it's the Shock or the Titans. But to see one of the favorites go down early like that is just not something you expect to even be in the script.
No, whoever's writing that script needs a raise. But holy cow. Like, this game was phenomenal. Like, this was the ultimate back and forth, like, literally one map back and forth each time. Like, it's definitely callbacks to, like you said, the stage 1 finals, not just with Rialto. Now, granted, the Rialto in the stage 1 finals was not close. Like, there was no C9 ability there. But I think, first we have to talk about the Atlanta Reign. Like, Erster and Baby Bay have definitely cemented themselves as one of the top DPS duos in the playoff meta. They kept up with Sinatraa and Striker, so that alone should be enough to warrant at least some discussion. Dogman, I think you could make an argument that he's becoming one of the best flex supports in this current meta. He's feeding much less. It still happens occasionally, but as a whole, Atlanta is playing really well. I feel like they were caught off guard by New York, but as a whole, I still think they're one of the teams to beat. For that C9 though, because multiple people have looked at it, multiple people have broken it down. It's not cut and dry whether the fight would have went, the Shock's way or not. But what it does come down to is I don't think it's I don't think it's the worst C9 we've ever seen. Like, it's not like Envy flying off the payload, or it's not like Young Jin stepping away from the payload. Like, this is clearly two high caliber teams going in a fight. They were all positioned correctly. Like, they were all right where they needed to be. Really, the only mistake on the Shock side was Choi Hobin's fault, because he went to use accretion, flew up in the air, and flew a little too high. Because he thought Smurf was there. Unfortunately, Smurf got killed right at that moment, and then the Doomfist got hit with the accretion, and that knocked him back, so he had to get health. Plus, he just took a boulder to the face, and that's what led to the C9. Now,
that's why he's gold.
There you go. Exactly. the good old gold Troy Hoban joke. But as a whole, like you can nitpick and talk all this, but it goes back to like the basic law of competition. Don't put yourself in that situation. If you're in a situation where one little mess up is going to cost you the match, then you've already lost the match. Like you should never put yourself in that type of situation. So I think the Shock did the right thing. They you could tell like they were upset that they got knocked to the losers bracket, but they kind of took it on the chin and said, you know what, we're not done here. We're going to keep going. Which we've seen multiple other teams do it as well. Like Atlanta basically said the same thing. Like Atlanta said, "Hey man, we're just happy to be here. We didn't even think we'd make it here. So what if we lost? We're gonna keep playing." And that's exactly how you have to take it. You have to say, "Look, all right, it was a rough fight. We messed up. Let's just not put ourselves in that situation again." And that's all it comes down to. So this like if you missed the playoffs last week, check out the highlights for New York and then watch this game. Like because as much as I was crapping on London earlier, like this was definitely a long, grueling game where you could see there was a high level of technical play here. Like you can see like this is two teams that at least grasp what the meta is supposed to be and the basic combos of the meta, and they're not just slamming into each other at times. So yeah, this was like I've watched this game 2.5 times now, in various different ways because it's that interesting to me. And if honestly, I feel like going forward, we keep getting these games every week that surpass the previous weeks. This one's going to be hard to top.
I think for me, the thing that made it more of like an energy, like getting sucked out of you moment was the fact that even before that, the Shock were in a position where they had to hold for nearly 4 minutes on the final point of Rialto. And they were so close to finishing it up. And, Rialto at that point is not the easiest map to attack, so it was definitely in the wheelhouse. Unfortunately, things happened, and they got sent down to the lower bracket.
Hey, you know of a team who held for 4 minutes on a point of Rialto? A team that's still in the winners bracket called New York XL.
Yeah, imagine that we actually have our division winners meeting in the upper bracket final. So you got the top 2 seeds, you got the Vancouver Titans and the New York Excelsior, who have effectively rewritten the narrative at this point. So the Excelsior, they sent the defending champions down to the lower bracket with a 4-1 win over London. Then, then they faced Kryptonite. They went up against the Atlanta Reign, the team that handed them not 1 but 2 losses in the regular season. A team who just seemed to have New York's number, and then New York comes in, and they finalize that redemption arc, picking up a 4-2 win over Atlanta. And, now, New York is in a position 1 win away from securing their spot in the grand finals. And, it's moments like this, I would not have expected it. I expected New York to level up, but they do have a much better grasp of the current meta, a lot higher than any one of us would have predicted in this case. And, for the Titans, looking back at their match against the Gladiators, they really adapted well to the aggression that the Gladiators brought to that series. And, I was honestly expecting it to go to that 7th map in that series, with Titans still picking up the win. So for them to close out in 6 was nice to see. But, man, Excelsior, you look at how Sabiolvi has done. And he's really come up in the clutch, not just on Reaper, but also on the Bastion. But, going into the playoffs, I would not have said that we'd be seeing a ton of Symmetra Bastion strats. And sure enough, we're seeing it. And it's not just one team, it's been a couple of different teams, but it's so crazy seeing this turnaround. And it really makes you wonder, what's New York going to pull out at this point? Are they going to be able to figure every team out? Because obviously the Titans, I don't think the Titans have looked as dominant as New York has in their wins. So it's weird how the script at this point has kind of got turned on its head, where no, in this current meta, I honestly have a few more questions about Titans than I do New York, and that is not something I ever thought I would be saying, especially at this point in the playoffs, going into week 2. But who knows at this point? Because obviously, up is down, left is right. I have no idea who's going to win that one. Maybe New York's going to actually come out the champions this year, which would be something that no one saw come in. And you know what? That would be like the perfect cap, or the perfect way to like end the season.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about New York here and there throughout the night, but it's funny to me that they're essentially running, after all this season, they're essentially running their season 1 roster minus Arc. Like that's essentially what they're running. Like they're running Mono, Meko, SBB, and Libero, and then Jonak and Animo, who basically replaced Arc because Arc went missing. We don't talk about where Arc went. But as a whole, like you said, NYXL just, I don't know, like they seem to have figured it out faster than anyone expected, and definitely faster than a lot of the other teams. Like Meko looks phenomenal on Sigma, which is weird because he's been one of the, at least mine and a few other people's, huge criticizing points throughout the season for this team. Jonak has looked good on the Moira. He's also flexed to the Ana, which we know he can play very well. It's funny that this is where they ended, and they look really well at it. Libero finally seems to have woken up. He's second in elims per 10 for Doomfist players, primary Doomfist players, even though we've seen Libero flex around a little bit more. That's what this team needed. Like, this team needed a little bit more firepower. And you talked about SBB, and SBB, I think, is what this roster needs at all times. Like, he seems to be like the calming, driving force for this roster. Like, you can tell, like, the NYXL have always been like a defensive, tempo based team. Like, they clearly make things go the way they want, and then they proceed to stomp you into the ground doing that. And we saw when they don't get to do that earlier in the season, Atlanta Reign walked over them. Like, that's basically why they lost. In this meta, they can slow things down, they can play to their strengths, and that's why they do really well. And I feel like SBB is a huge part of that, just because when he's in, their alt usage is better, their target priority is better. Like, I just feel like he's leading them a lot better. And they looked really good their first game against the Spitfire, but when they went up against Atlanta, I was like, oh, this is going to be a good test. And they frankly, like, I don't want to say wiped the floor with Atlanta, but there were times when it wasn't close. And we talked about that 4-minute hold on B on Rialto, and as much as I want to say that was Atlanta failing to adapt, that was also NYXL just positioning and playing that point really well. So it seems like they know these maps, they know the strategies that they want to run, they know the Symmetra Bastion teleport spots, stuff like that. So this is a team that we didn't think would be as dangerous as they are, and I don't want to sleep on them, but that I'm still worried that the inconsistencies we saw throughout the season could rear its head. So I think if they put up a solid showing against the Titans, win or lose, I think that's going to be really telling. But it's going to be on the Titans to adapt, because it seems like NYXL has a pretty good set game plan, and it's going to be hard to beat that right now.
Right, so moving forward, that is going to be one of the big matches this week. You have Vancouver, New York, and like, even looking back, we kind of worried a lot about, like, we're not going to see this match until the end of the year, like the end of Stage 4. But we did get to see it at one point in the playoffs, and Titans did take that one, so we'll see whether or not history repeats itself. But looking at the playoff schedule for this week, for week number 2, looking at the lower bracket where we kick things off, we have the Atlanta Reign going up against the Hangzhou Spark. So winner go home moment. Then we have the LA Gladiators going up against the San Francisco Shock. So that is on Thursday. On Friday, we have the upper bracket finals. Winner will advance to the grand finals. That would be Vancouver going up against New York. And then we have the semifinals for the lower bracket. So we'll have the winner of that Reign Spark game going up against the winner of Gladiators Shock. And then finally, the lower bracket finals, which would basically be whoever loses between the Titans and Excelsior, and then the other lower bracket finalist. So it's gonna be kind of spread out this week. You know, we kick off with 2 matches, and then it kind of gets spread out a little bit. You know, basically 1 match per day. So that'll be kind of interesting. Some quicker days potentially, depending on how long these series go. But you know, we haven't seen a whole lot of like 4-0s or anything like that. We've seen a lot of games going to like 6 or 7. And honestly, at this point, I do not expect anything different, especially when we get this deep into the bracket. But looking at the Atlanta Reign going up against the Hangzhou Spark, honestly, like, the Reign are every bit as good as we expected them to be, and then the Spark have just kind of been flying under the radar. Like, honestly, not even looking at the sets, I never would have guessed Godspeed would even be top 3 in the major categories. And that is so sneaky. It really makes you wonder, is the DPS for the Spark going to outweigh the Reign? Or, you know, can we see the Reign's aggression really be the thing to push them to the forefront? I honestly don't know who I want to win this one, because obviously, you know, we're fans of the Spark. We like the Atlanta story of, you know, being the team that kind of gets counted out a lot, but, you know, Spark are kind of in the same position as the Reign in this particular moment. So my bracket's already shot in this case. I didn't have the Spark or Atlanta at this point. I'll have to double check on that front. But when you look at this match, what do you think is going to be the deciding factor? Do you feel like there's a clear-cut winner in regards to any of the lines? Like, do you favor, you know, Gator Sigma over what we have seen from someone like Rhea? And is that enough to turn the tides here?
I don't think the Sigma battle is as important here as it is in some of the other matchups, because I feel like Gator is going to win out over Rhea. I think what it's going to come down to is how long the supports stay alive. And I know that's a really basic thing to say, but both of these teams have really strong support lines. So if you can, honestly, if you're Erster, you're going to be looking to take IDK out of the fight. Like, if you can take IDK out of the fight, because he tends to be the turning point for a lot of these Spark fights that could go either way. Like, you know, not the clear cut, like, oh, they use 3 ultimates, we're going to lose anyway kind of fight. But, you know, the knockdown, drag out fights, IDK seems to be the difference maker for them. As good as Godsby and Bozzy are, IDK is the one that usually comes in, cleans up, or keeps people alive, or makes space. IDK is like the silent guy on the team that is slowly carrying the team to victory, and nobody quite realizes it. So Erster's going to need to be taking him out. Opposite side, this should come as no surprise, but Atlanta Reign's map win-loss ratio is directly tied to how many times Dogman dies. So if you can kill Dogman more than the average, you have a very good chance of winning that map. And it's a fun, dumb statistic, because when you say it out loud, it makes sense. Like, oh, the supports die a lot, then you're gonna lose the map. But it's weird because it's very specific to Dogman in this instance. It's not the same way for Masa. So if they can control Dogman and force Dogman to make mistakes, because it seems like when Atlanta is down, that's when Dogman gets very aggressive, like, because he seems to, not that he seems, he is the type of player that tries to make plays, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. That's going to be the Sparks win condition. And I'm with you. Like, I think either one of these teams could take it. And I'm going to double down on what I said earlier. I feel like if the Spark win this one, they only get more dangerous. It's like the anime powering up. Like, they just keep getting stronger as it goes on, and that's how I feel. Now, granted, like you said, Atlanta's just as strong as we think they are. So this is going to be a really good one. I gave the edge to Atlanta, just off of what we've seen and just as a whole, but it was very minor, like 4-3. Like this one, I went back and forth on. Like I said, I watched multiple games from different perspectives, pulled stats. Nothing really pointed me one way or the other than it's going to come down to, egregious mistakes being caught out. Like whichever team does a better job of basically putting the other team in their place is going to win this one. Like this one's so close to call.
I think in this case, the Spark are going to put a muzzle on Dogman and take this one. I don't know if I'm saying that just because they eliminated the Dynasty or if I legit want Hancho to win. But who knows? Like, I feel like out of these two, I think this one's going to be a little bit closer. Not to say I don't think the Gladiator Shock is going to be close, but like we see how the Shock do against the other Cali teams. In this case, but I want to see more Symmetra shenanigans coming out from Atlanta again in this series, and we'll see how that is going to play out. But in the other lower bracket match, we do have the LA Gladiators up against the San Francisco Shock. So another win or go home match. Winner will go on to face the winner of the prior match in the semifinals for the lower bracket. And this one, it's always interesting because, we always talk about how the Shock have kind of had their own way of adapting to the meta. And I feel like out of all of the teams, the Gladiators have really... I think they've been the most aggressive team that we have seen in this current meta at this point. The Shock, they've been benching Super, throughout the playoffs. They've been playing Smurf to play the main tank for them, who's been on Orisa, so we haven't seen any sort of like odd swaps in that regard. And for the Gladiators, I feel like the Gladiators are like the team that always needs to close out a series as quickly as possible, because the longer you give a team, the more the other team sees you, the more they're going to be able to learn to adapt. And that's really been a key thing for a lot of these drawn-out series. Whoever is a better team to adapt is always the one that comes out on top at the end. That's how the Titans ended up beating the Gladiators and close it out in 6. And, for the Shock, I feel like if you're the Shock, just getting to the playoffs and making it to this point isn't enough for them. They seem like the type of team who... it's win or nothing. Like, there's going to be disappointment on this team if they don't make it to Philly at this point. So in this case, I feel like the Shock are going to close it out in 6. And I feel like the Gladiators, as good as this team have been, like you called out Big Goose earlier with some of his positioning, and honestly, looking back, I feel like a lot of that was just due to the fact that, Big Goose saw like all of these predictions being thrown out, and not that many people were pulling for the Gladiators, and that really irked him. So then you just see him level up the aggression, just like the Gladiators have done across the board, and it's kind of bit him in the ass a lot so far in these playoffs. So I'm expecting Shock to expose that in this series.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Shock will take this one 4-2, just because when they played London, like they didn't even make it a contest. Like it wasn't even close most of the time. Gladiators are, I think, a little bit stronger of an opponent than London would present to them, but Gladiators as a whole, I don't think can stand up to the Shock's versatility and just raw talent. Like that's the thing. Like when you look at these two teams, clearly the Shock have a better tank lineup. Like there's no way you can dispute that, regardless of if they're running, Smurf and Choi Hoban, or, if they're really stomping you Super and Nevix, as we saw against London. The lineup, Roar and Void just can't stand up to that right now. Like they're just not as strong of a tank duo. Whereas support side is a little closer. The only thing that leads me to the Shock support side is Shaz has been oddly quiet in the postseason. Like Shaz is kind of came in as like that Fragger Zenyatta, and he still hasn't quite lived up to that bloodthirsty nature. Whereas we see even like Jonak and stuff on the Moira is still pretty bloodthirsty. So Shaz has been rather quiet, and like I said, Big Goose has been very consistent and very good. He's just been caught out a few times, so he's making weird mistakes that are uncharacteristic of him. Whereas Moth and Violet aren't. Like that's what it comes down to. Honestly, the only part that's an even playing field among these teams is the DPS lineup, and I still give the edge to the Shock just because you don't know which DPS are going to play. Whether it's going to be Sinatra, we've seen Architect on the Bastion. We've seen lots of different looks out of the Shock's DPS lineup. Whereas Surefour and Hydration are that they're pretty much going to play Reaper and Doomfist, or Reaper and what Farah, like you kind of know the looks that the Gladiators are going to give. So unless they opt to go with the Surefour Decay lineup and really throw like a wrench, I don't think they have a whole lot of chance here. I'd love to see the Gladiators go further because, like you said, they are an aggressive and they are a very fun team to watch. It just seems like the Shock, despite their C9 loss to Atlanta, there weren't a lot of egregious errors in that match, and there were no egregious errors in the London match because they just stomped him into the ground. So I feel like this is going to be same. It's going to be a little closer than London, but I still feel like the Shock are going to take this one.
Do you, like, in a situation, let's say like the Shock lose this, do you feel like that would be the biggest disappointment in regards to the postseason, even though in like London going out early, Dynasty not making the cut even after getting second, third chances, things like that? Like, would that be the biggest surprise to you outside of just the Shock getting dropped to the lower bracket that early?
It would definitely be up there. I think the bigger surprise would be the Gladiators beating them and advancing, just because of the curse not curse playoffs. But yeah, that would have to be like the biggest. I guess you could say like the upset moment so far. It'd be like the Titans getting dropped early, or stuff like that. Like honestly, there were three big teams going into the playoffs that we were kind of sure of. It was Atlanta as third, and they were the wishy-washy one. And then there was Shock Titans. So absolutely, like one of those top two specifically getting dropped out this early would be surprising.
Well, we'll see who advances at this point, to make it to the lower bracket finals, to go against whoever gets the short end of the stick between the Vancouver Titans and the New York Excelsior. So winner here punches their ticket to Philadelphia to the grand finals. So still got a couple more weeks on that, but we've seen these two teams match off already this season. Vancouver's been looking pretty good against New York, but now all of a sudden, New York's coming in looking like almost completely different team. Well, I guess technically they are a completely different team since they've been fielding SBB in this case. Flower really not here in this moment, despite his Pharah heroics in the play-in.
Played one map.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, we've seen things adjust over the course, going from the play-in to the playoffs. But man, SBB has been looking so good, and if you're the Titans, they've been relying a lot on like Soa Minsu. They've been relying on Hoxel. We've seen Bumper getting benched throughout the playoffs, which is something that, we were kind of wondering about. Like, is Tizzy going to come in and play? Sure enough, Tizzy's been in on the Orisa. John has been holding it down in regards to the Sigma play. And I know initially I was like, okay, Titans. I saw the starting lineup, Tizzy's in, I was like, okay. Like, I was okay with that. But I'm like, I couldn't help but think, I was like, oh no. Is Tizzy going to be the remix this year? Like, is this what's gonna happen? And I'm like, no, not like this. But we've been okay. We're good so far. but we'll see if he keeps performing. But like, I did not want to see that happen, to the Titans after how dominant they have been. Obviously we've talked about Bumper's issues with the Orisa play. And, turns out Orisa's still pretty important to the current meta, running double barrier all the time. But he's been... I don't want to say he's been spectacular, but he hasn't been, terrible to the point where you don't recognize a moment or he stands out. But I wish I had his stats in front of me to see where he's ranking up against some of the other Orisa players out there. But I will say, probably the most interesting thing is, I know after the plays, we were kind of curious to see what the breakdown was going to be between who was playing the Sigma on these teams. And in regards to the playoffs, it's primarily been the off tanks. It's not always the main tanks, as, we had kind of thought, because, we saw, we thought, the aggressive playstyle was going to be kind of, towards the forefront. So, Gooshway hasn't been on the Sigma, which kind of surprised me. I thought he would be, the Sigma player for the Spark. That's not been the case. And, if Bumper was in, I thought Bumper would have been on the Sigma, but, it's been Janu in this case. So for me, for Vancouver, New York, honestly, my gut is telling me New York is going to take this. Which I hate to say, but it's just I want to see Titans shock. I don't care where it happens or when it happens. I would be gutted if we don't get to see that match at any point in the playoffs. And for me, just seeing how these teams have fared, I feel like the most likeliest place to see that is in the lower bracket at this point. But man, that would be crazy, going this far into the season and seeing the final match being between those two in the lower bracket, where one of them goes home at that point and they don't meet in the grand finals. But I feel like this one probably going to be a 7-map series. It's just a matter of, can the runaway squad clutch it out like we've seen them do in the past, or whether or not New York is going to throw out something that we haven't seen yet. Because I feel like New York has been kind of like the pocket strat team more so than some of the others. So I feel like they have some other concoction that they're to throw out in this series that's going to pull out the win for them.
Yeah, I broke down kind of how New York's playing earlier, so I won't go into that again. I think what kind of gives the Titans the edge here, and I'm gonna say Titans 4-3, pretty much, on a razor's edge, is their adaptability. What we saw when we saw the other teams play New York, they really didn't adapt at all. The rain basically slammed their heads against the brick wall throughout the maps and didn't really change anything. They were like, all right, if our strategy works, we win. If our strategy doesn't work, we lose. That's basically how the rain game went. And like I said, the London game, there wasn't too much insights you could really gain from that. London just did not play well. So as long as Vancouver keeps, an open mind to strategies and remains adaptable, which we have no reason to think that they won't be, because that we saw it against the Gladiators. Gladiators were clearly beating them, and then Vancouver came back and was like, no, we'll switch up a style, we'll change a hero here or there, and then they'll run it back. So I feel like Vancouver has a little bit of the edge in adaptability here. That being said, I don't see a world where either one of these teams couldn't win. Both of these teams are looking phenomenal right now, so I struggled calling this. Like I said, the only thing that kind of gave the edge to Vancouver is the adaptability.
Yeah, I know the last time we saw these two teams play, it was kind of a clown fiesta, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean...
but the last time New York went up against a team that they were 0-2 against, they ended up winning. And we're in that spot again.
It's going to be a great game, regardless of how it plays out. As far as like watching Vancouver versus Shock, I think you're right. Like Vancouver would have to, lose this one to see them in the losers bracket, because I feel like if New York gets to play the Shock first, I feel like New York's gonna, you know, go on to the final again. So like we could potentially be looking at, you know, these teams play against each other twice.
Mhm.
And that would be fun in its own right. But right now, I'm gonna say Vancouver 4-3.
All right. So at this point in the brackets, even if we get Titan Shock at the end of it, it kind of we already had the like the tie break situation ruled out for the grand finals, even if Titans do face a Shock, since currently the Shock are already ahead in that case. So fortunately, we're not going to get that to see whether or not Titans can come out ahead in the overall season series, but we'll see how things shake up here. I'm not gonna post like updated brackets or anything like that. I do know the Gigabrain bracket creator that we've been using does have an option to update, as the brackets progress. So if you guys want to fill out new brackets, you can do that. And then I know when the playoffs wrap up, I'll go back, tally up how many correct predictions we got in regards to the Discord, between not just us but also whichever community members of ours did fill out theirs. I know mine's completely shot. I know a few others are as well, but just not as bad as mine. So who knows? Maybe I'll do better when it comes to the Gauntlet in October. Who knows? But if you're Atlanta, I'm curious how Atlanta's going to do, since they're not going to have Gator. I wonder who's going to step in at that point. I have no idea how that's going to work out. But it should be another fun week of Overwatch League playoffs. We'll get to see who is going to play in the grand finals when all is said and done this week. So I'm ready. We'll see if we have any other grueling 7-map series, if we have any awful ways to end a particular series, who knows. But when it comes to these playoffs, nothing. You can expect like anything and everything. So we might have some blowouts, we might have some really long series, we might even have an upset along the way. So who knows at this point.
I would expect an upset along the way. And I honestly could see the Shock Gladiators game being a blowout if the Shock play like they did before. It's gonna be a fun week. Like honestly, this is our last week before play-ins, right? Or before the grand final, not play-ins. That's in the past. It's getting late.
Yeah, we basically have this week. Then we got like 2 weeks until the grand finals.
The grand finals, which I'll be there reporting live on the floor with the DJ Khaled performance. Maybe. I don't know. I don't think they've announced if they're doing music this year or not. Like, I haven't seen anything on it yet, so we'll have to wait and see.
Then again, after how embarrassing the last one was, I don't know if we can rely on it.
Yeah, I mean they could get somebody that's actually invested in the community, like Zed, to perform. Like that would probably be pretty well received.
I can see that. But who knows? But with that being said, guys, we are going to close it out for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best things to do is to go leave us a review over on iTunes. We're always looking for ways to improve the show. So reach out to us, let us know how we're doing. If you would like to find additional Overwatch-related content, we do have our podcast directory for all things Overwatch. That would be Overwatch Recall. So you can find that over on our website. And then every Sunday, sometimes Mondays, depending on how busy the weekend is, we do the weekly recall, which is our weekly episodic listen of all of the podcast episodes released in the Overwatch scene. So to keep up with the latest, be sure to follow Overwatch Recall on Twitter at OW Recall. Of course, you can find it also posted in our Discord. Now, if you would like to support our podcast network, well, you can do so a couple of different ways. It is September on Twitch, so there are half off subs. I believe it's for first-time subscribers only, though, if I'm not mistaken. So keep that in mind.
You can have had a subscription in the last 30 days, but if you didn't, you can take advantage of the 250.
Woo, 250. That is some pretty cheap entertainment. And we're here, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 nights a week, depending on, if we're actually streaming. But outside of that, Twitch Prime subs always appreciated, and we do have a Patreon page where we have tiers starting at just $1 a month. So for more info, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/OWL Network. So you too can join the likes of our master and above patrons, Blazing Bob, Brendan, Josabal, Owl, and Kesha in helping our network grow. Now, outside of that, we do have a number of ways how you can connect with us over on social media, website, all of that good stuff. So, Spider, why don't you let our audience know how they can find us?
Sure thing. You can email the show directly at contact@owlnshow.com. You can check out the website, www.owlnshow.com. Twitter, @OWLNShow. YouTube, you can check out our newest Sigma Deep Dive video, youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. Discord, you can talk to us directly, discord.me/OWLNShow. As Toto mentioned, it is September on Twitch. So if you're listening to the audio version, come check out the live shows at twitch.tv/OWLNShow. We have multiple shows throughout the week. You're currently listening to our Monday night show, Overwatch League Network. It airs at 7 p.m. Pacific time. Tuesdays is our Fantasy Overwatch League show, Owl by the Numbers, and that is 6 p.m. Pacific. Wednesdays is the variety catch-all Overwatch show, Heroes Never Die. That is 5 p.m. Pacific, and then we run host streams at various times throughout the week. We didn't stream last week because of playoffs. I don't know if I'll stream this week because of the same reason. Maybe I'll just hop on and do some arcade or something and talk about the playoffs while they're going on. But honestly, most people will be watching the playoffs and not me, so there's not much of a point. I can't pull in big names like Avast to come talk shit about Overwatch, so I have more fun just enjoying it and talking in Discord. So hop in Discord and talk to us. Finally, I'll plug our Patreon one more time, patreon.com/OWL Network. You can find me on Twitter at SpiderGD. And where can they find you, Totem?
I'm also on Twitter at Totally_DrunkCTR. But with that being said, guys, that is going to do it for us here tonight on Overwatch League Network. You've been listening to episode number 96. I've been your host, Tumblery Drunk, joined this week and every week by Spider, and we hope to see you guys back tomorrow night as we talk a little bit more about playoffs and pick'ems on OWL by the Numbers. Take care and have a good night.